The morning sun burned through sulfur-stained air on February 24th, 1945, as Corporal Dom Tutalo crouched behind a shattered concrete wall on Iwo Jima, watching his sergeant prepare for another run. Sergeant Harlan Jeffery stood 68 pounds heavier than normal, the M22 flamethrower strapped across his back like a metal cross. 3 members of their demolition squad were already dead, 2 more were wounded badly enough to be evacuated. Now it was just Jeffery, Tutalo, and the caves. Always the caves. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Jeffery had a personal score to settle with Iwo Jima. He still carried a bullet in his shoulder from Saipan, still wore his helmet with 2 bullet holes punched clean through, front to back, from a sniper's near miss 3 days earlier. The Japanese pillbox ahead had just killed 2 Marines from Charlie Company. Jeffery lost his temper. He grabbed the flamethrower, checked the pressure gauge, 350 pounds per square inch, nitrogen compressed and ready, and started moving forward. What happened next wasn't the stuff of Hollywood spectacle. It was mechanical, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. Jeffery would spend the next several hours methodically burning out Japanese positions in a sector the Marines called the Boat Basin. No one counted how many caves he cleared that day. No one recorded the exact time it took, but when the sun set on February 24th, an entire defensive complex that had held up the First Battalion, 24th Marines, for 5 days, was finally silent. The Marines who survived that day understood something that military historians would spend decades trying to quantify. The flamethrower wasn't just a weapon. It was psychological warfare made visible, a device that could accomplish in minutes what conventional weapons couldn't achieve in hours. The story of Marines clearing multiple cave positions in rapid succession on Iwo Jima isn't about superhuman heroism or exaggerated kill counts. It's about tactical desperation meeting technological innovation at the exact moment when both sides understood that this battle would be decided not by who could fire more bullets, but by who could break the enemy's will to remain in their fortifications. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi spent 8 months turning Iwo Jima into the most sophisticated fortress in military history. While American bombers pounded the island's surface installations day after day, Kuribayashi's engineers worked underground with mining equipment, concrete mixers, and thousands of Korean laborers to carve a subterranean city from solid volcanic rock. By February of 1945, more than 11 miles of tunnels snaked beneath the 8-square-mile island, connecting caves, bunkers, ammunition storage areas, command posts, and living quarters for 22,000 Japanese defenders. Kuribayashi had studied American amphibious tactics for 2 years, analyzing every landing from Guadalcanal to the Philippines. He understood that Marines expected to fight Japanese soldiers who would charge their positions in desperate banzai attacks or defend fixed bunkers until overwhelmed. Instead, he designed a defense that violated every assumption American commanders held about Japanese military doctrine. His soldiers would remain invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. They would strike without warning, then disappear before the Marines could retaliate. Most importantly, they would fight from positions that conventional weapons couldn't destroy. The defensive positions on Iwo Jima represented the culmination of Japanese military engineering in the Pacific War. Reinforced concrete pillboxes were positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire across every avenue of approach. Bunkers were buried under 3 feet of volcanic rock and soil. Cave entrances were concealed by natural terrain features and camouflage. Machine gun positions could be accessed through multiple tunnels, allowing defenders to abandon one firing position and reappear at another before American forces could respond. Artillery pieces were mounted on rails inside caves, rolled out to fire, then pulled back inside before counter-battery fire could arrive. When the 5th Marine Division landed on the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, they faced a tactical problem that defied conventional solutions. Naval bombardment had failed to destroy the underground fortifications. Aerial bombing couldn't penetrate reinforced concrete buried beneath volcanic rock. Artillery fire exploded harmlessly on the surface while Japanese defenders sat safe in their tunnels. Tank-mounted 75mm guns couldn't elevate enough to hit cave entrances on hillsides. Infantry, armed with rifles and grenades, couldn't get close enough to fortified positions without suffering catastrophic casualties. The Marines needed a weapon that could reach inside fortifications and kill defenders without exposing American infantry to sustained fire at close range. They needed something that could accomplish in seconds what conventional weapons couldn't achieve in hours. They needed fire. The M22 flamethrower that Sergeant Jeffery carried on February 24th was the culmination of 3 years of rapid wartime development. Earlier models, the M1 and M1A1, had been notoriously unreliable. The M1's ignition system depended on hydrogen being ignited by a battery-powered spark. Moisture would short out the electrical system, hydrogen cylinders would fail, operators would find themselves standing in front of enemy positions with weapons that wouldn't fire. On Buna in New Guinea, in December of 1942, M1 flamethrowers had failed so consistently that infantry lost confidence in the weapon entirely. The M22, standardized in February of 1944, finally gave American forces a dependable flame weapon. The ignition system used a spring-loaded pin to puncture a chemical cartridge, producing an 8-second flame that ignited the fuel as it sprayed from the nozzle. The system worked even in humid tropical conditions. The napalm-thickened fuel burned hotter and stuck to targets better than earlier gasoline mixtures. The weapon could reliably project flame 40 yards, double the effective range of the M1. But reliability came at a cost measured in human vulnerability. The operator had to carry 68 pounds of equipment on his back, 3 tanks mounted on a backpack frame. 2 outer tanks held 4 gallons, total, of thickened diesel mixed with gasoline. The center tank held compressed nitrogen at operating pressures between 300 and 350 pounds per square inch. The weapon could fire for 8 to 9 seconds continuously. That was all. 8 seconds of flame, then the operator was carrying 68 pounds of useless weight while standing exposed in front of enemy positions. The tactical requirements made flamethrower operators the highest priority targets on the battlefield. Japanese machine gunners learned to identify the distinctive equipment silhouette and concentrate fire immediately. The bright orange flame, with its distinctive black smoke, marked the operator's exact position for every Japanese soldier within sight. Doctrine called for 4 riflemen to provide covering fire for each flamethrower operator, but doctrine assumed the covering team would survive long enough to provide that cover. On Iwo Jima, that assumption proved catastrophically optimistic. By mid-February of 1945, 1 Marine Battalion's portable flame unit sustained a casualty rate of 92%. These weren't just wounds that could be treated and returned to duty. Most flamethrower operators who were hit were killed outright. The average lifespan of a flamethrower operator on Iwo Jima was estimated at 4 minutes of actual combat exposure. 4 minutes, not 4 hours, not 4 days, 4 minutes between when an operator began approaching an enemy position and when he was killed or wounded. Dom Tutalo's flamethrower squad had experienced this reality firsthand. In their first engagement on D+1, everybody got killed except Sergeant Jeffery and 1 other operator. Since then, life had been a constant cycle of waiting for a call, a few moments of terror and flame, then back to waiting. They soon lost count of the number of fortifications they attacked. None knew how many Japanese they had shot, incinerated, blown to bits, or buried alive. The psychological weight of operating a flamethrower went beyond the physical danger. Corporal Joseph Rybakiewicz, another Marine flamethrower operator on Iwo Jima, carried 90 pounds of equipment into battle and took out 7 pillboxes during his 30 days on the island. He also rescued at least 2 wounded Marines under fire. After the war, he kept a photograph of a Japanese soldier's wife and 2 children, taken from an enemy he had killed. The photo bothered him his entire life. He asked his wife to return it to the Japanese consulate after his death, trying to make some amends for what he had to do with the flamethrower. The caves, Jeffery and Tutalo faced on February 24th were part of the defensive complex that the Marines had nicknamed the Boat Basin. For 5 days, this beachfront sector had defied every assault. Artillery couldn't reach the fortifications. Naval gunfire couldn't penetrate them. Infantry couldn't get close enough without being cut down by machine gun fire from multiple interlocking positions. Charlie Company had suffered heavy casualties trying to advance through the area. Now, with most of the combat engineers busy sealing larger caves in the rear, the task of clearing the Boat Basin fell to the Flamethrower men. The tactic was straightforward, but exhausting. Riflemen would identify a cave entrance or pillbox. They would provide suppressive fire, trying to keep Japanese defenders from targeting the Flamethrower operator. The operator would move forward in short rushes, staying as low as possible, using shell craters and destroyed equipment for cover. When he got within 40 yards, close enough for the flame to reach, he would stop, aim and fire. 8 seconds. That was all the time he had. 8 seconds to pour flame into the opening, 8 seconds to kill or drive out the defenders, 8 seconds before the fuel ran out and he had to retreat back to friendly lines or die trying. If the operator survived the approach and the attack, he faced the withdrawal. Japanese defenders who had fled deeper into the tunnel system would re-emerge. Snipers who had been suppressed during the assault would start shooting again. Machine gunners from adjacent positions would concentrate fire on the retreating operator. The 68 pounds of equipment that had been a weapon was now just weight, slowing him down, making him an easier target. And if he made it back to American lines, he had to refuel, reload, and prepare to do it again. Because there was always another cave, always another pillbox, always another defensive position that conventional weapons couldn't destroy. The effectiveness of flamethrowers against fortified positions had been recognized long before Iwo Jima. On Saipan, in June of 1944, Marine units had used portable flame weapons to clear Japanese bunkers and cave systems. On Tinian, in July and August, flamethrowers had proven essential for reducing fortified positions. But Iwo Jima represented a quantum leap in defensive sophistication. Kuribayashi's engineers had designed positions specifically to survive conventional weapons, while maintaining excellent fields of fire. The caves weren't simple holes in the rock. They were military installations with reinforced entrances, multiple levels, ventilation systems, and interconnecting tunnels that allowed defenders to retreat and reappear elsewhere. What made flamethrowers uniquely effective against these positions wasn't their physical destructiveness. A 75mm tank shell carried far more explosive force than 4 gallons of burning napalm. What made flamethrowers effective was psychology. Fire didn't respect concrete walls or ventilation systems. Fire consumed oxygen. Fire filled enclosed spaces. Fire found every crack and opening. When a flamethrower operator fired into a cave entrance, the defenders had seconds to decide: stay inside and burn, or exit through a rear entrance and face American rifle fire. Very few survived either choice. The fear of fire is primal. Encoded in the oldest parts of the human brain, every soldier can be trained to accept the possibility of being shot or blown up. Artillery fire is random, impersonal. Bullets kill instantly or they don't. But burning alive is different. It's personal. It's prolonged. It's the one death that training and discipline cannot prepare you for. Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima had withstood 3 days of naval bombardment. They'd endured artillery barrages, aerial bombing, tank assaults, and infantry attacks with rifles and grenades. They'd held their positions through all of it. Then, the flamethrowers appeared. Corporal Raymond Hart, serving with the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines, watched as a flamethrower team approached a bunker on February 24th. The operator fired a burst through the opening. Within seconds, 3 Japanese soldiers came running out the back exit. They weren't shooting. They weren't throwing grenades. They were just running, trying to escape the fire. Hart's squad shot them as they emerged. Hart said later that he'd watched Japanese soldiers hold positions through hours of artillery fire and coordinated infantry assaults, but 8 seconds of flame made them abandon a fortified position and run into certain death. By late February, Marine Corps intelligence officers were documenting a pattern. Japanese units that had fought tenaciously against conventional weapons were breaking when flamethrower teams appeared. Defenders who would remain in pillboxes through sustained artillery bombardment would evacuate when flamethrowers were deployed. The response wasn't universal. Experienced units with veteran leadership sometimes maintained discipline and accepted casualties rather than abandoning positions. But even veteran units showed signs of stress when flamethrowers were used repeatedly. The tactical impact extended beyond individual cave clearances. When word spread through Japanese defensive positions that flamethrower teams were operating in their sector, defenders began altering their behavior in ways that violated their training. Instead of remaining concealed until American forces approached, they started emerging from caves to engage Marines at longer ranges, hoping to kill the flamethrower operators before they could deploy their weapons. This tactical shift played directly into American advantages in firepower. Japanese soldiers who revealed their positions prematurely could be targeted with rifles, machine guns, mortars, and artillery with devastating effectiveness. General Kuribayashi recognized the threat. He ordered his troops to target flamethrower operators on sight, to prioritize them as high-value targets above even officers and radio operators. Japanese snipers and machine gunners tried. They succeeded often enough that Marine flamethrower casualties remained extremely high throughout the campaign, but they couldn't stop all the operators, and each operator who survived long enough to reach a fortified position could clear it in seconds, accomplishing what an entire rifle company might spend hours trying to achieve. The Americans responded by increasing flamethrower deployment and, critically, by mounting flamethrowers on Sherman tanks. The flame tank development had been relatively slow at first, but combat experience in the Marshall Islands and Marianas demonstrated the desperate need for armored flamethrower support. By the time of the Iwo Jima operation, 8 flame tanks had been converted at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii by Navy Seabees, working in absolute secrecy. The CBH-1 and improved CBH-2 flamethrower systems could project burning napalm 150 yards or more, nearly 4 times the range of portable units. The tanks carried 300 gallons of fuel instead of 4. They were protected by 3 inches of frontal armor the Japanese machine gun fire couldn't penetrate. The 8 flame tanks landed on Iwo Jima on D-Day, February 19th, but didn't go into action until February 21st. When they finally moved forward to support infantry assaults, the effect was immediate. Japanese positions that had withstood repeated infantry attacks would be cleared within minutes when a flame tank appeared. Battalion and regimental commanders began requesting flame tank support by name. Infantry units would sometimes halt their advance and wait for a flame tank, rather than attempt to clear fortified positions with conventional weapons. But there were only 8 flame tanks for the entire operation, shared among 3 Marine divisions. They couldn't be everywhere. That meant portable flamethrower operators, like Jeffery, Tutalo, and Rybakivitz, remained essential, irreplaceable, and utterly expendable in the brutal mathematics of cave warfare. The question at the heart of this story isn't whether one Marine cleared 12 caves in 90 minutes. The historical record doesn't support that specific claim. Herschel Woody Williams, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions on February 23rd, cleared 7 pillboxes over 4 hours, and his citation remains one of the most thoroughly documented flamethrower actions of the Pacific War. But the broader truth the exaggerated title points toward is more complex and more disturbing. Multiple Marine flamethrower operators on Iwo Jima did clear numerous enemy positions in relatively short time periods. They did accomplish what seemed impossible, and they did it by weaponizing the most primal human fear, turning it against an enemy who had proven willing to die for any other reason. What made these rapid cave clearances possible wasn't superhuman courage or physical prowess. It was the systematic exploitation of a psychological vulnerability that no amount of military training could eliminate. Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima were prepared to die. They were trained to accept death. Their culture honored sacrifice. Their military doctrine demanded it, but they weren't prepared to burn alive in darkness while their fortifications, the very positions that had kept them safe from every other American weapon, became ovens that cooked them from the inside out. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The documented cases of rapid cave clearances on Iwo Jima reveal a pattern that contradicts the sanitized version of warfare presented in most historical accounts. On February 24, Sergeant Harlan Jeffery's actions in the Boat Basin sector represented not an exception, but a template that multiple flamethrower operators followed throughout the campaign. The speed at which these operators could neutralize fortified positions wasn't the result of improved tactics or superior training. It was the result of exploiting a psychological vulnerability so fundamental that no military doctrine could address it. Private First Class Don Graves served as a flamethrower operator with the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. He was 17 years old when he enlisted in 1942. His father had been a Marine. Boot camp at Parris Island transformed him from a Detroit kid into what he would later describe as a weapon himself. By the time his battalion landed on Iwo Jima, Graves had developed the mechanical efficiency that came from knowing his life expectancy was measured in minutes once he started moving toward enemy positions. 335 Marines from Graves's battalion went ashore on February 19th. 18 came off the island alive. 5 weeks later, Graves was the only flamethrower operator in his battalion to survive the entire campaign. The mathematics of that survival rate tells a story that official histories prefer to minimize. Flamethrower operators didn't just face higher casualty rates than other Marines. They faced near certain death. The question wasn't whether they would be killed. The question was how many enemy positions they could destroy before that happened. The operational reality that Graves and his fellow operators faced was straightforward, but brutal. Japanese defenders concentrated their fire on flamethrower operators the moment they identified them, with Marines reporting that enemy forces seemed to direct mortar shells at individual flamethrowers rather than at entire units. How a West Virginia farm boy became a fearsome warrior with a flamethrower at Iwo Jima, too. The distinctive black smoke from burning diesel fuel marked each operator's exact location. The sharp hiss of compressed nitrogen being released announced his position even before the flame appeared. Every second an operator spent in the open, every movement toward an enemy position, drew fire from multiple Japanese defensive positions simultaneously. Yet, despite these overwhelming tactical disadvantages, flamethrower operators consistently accomplished what entire rifle companies could not. The reason had nothing to do with the weapon's physical characteristics and everything to do with its psychological impact. Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima were prepared to die. Their training emphasized honorable death in combat. Their culture celebrated sacrifice for the emperor. General Kuribayashi had spent months preparing them psychologically to hold their positions against overwhelming American firepower. But nothing in their training or culture prepared them for the specific horror of burning alive in darkness. The physical effects of flamethrower attacks on enclosed positions went beyond simple incineration. When napalm-thickened fuel entered a cave or pillbox through a firing slit or ventilation shaft, it didn't just burn. It consumed oxygen at a catastrophic rate. In an enclosed space, defenders had approximately 3 to 4 seconds before the oxygen content dropped below the level necessary to sustain consciousness. Carbon monoxide from incomplete combustion filled the remaining air. The temperature inside the fortification could reach over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit within seconds. Steel equipment became too hot to touch. Concrete walls retained heat for hours afterward. But the physical effects, devastating as they were, remained secondary to the psychological impact. The terror came from knowing what was about to happen. When a flamethrower operator appeared outside a Japanese position, defenders could see him approaching. They could hear the distinctive hiss of the ignition system. They had seconds, perhaps as many as 8 or 10, to make a decision that would determine how they died: stay inside the fortification and burn, exit through the rear entrance and face American rifle fire, or attempt to kill the operator before he could fire, knowing that doing so would draw concentrated fire from his covering team. Major General Clifton Cates, who commanded the 4th Marine Division on Iwo Jima and later served as Marine Corps Commandant, stated after the battle that he could not think of a more inhumane weapon than the flamethrower. How a West Virginia farm boy became a fearsome warrior with a flamethrower at Iwo Jima, too. His comment reflected not just the weapon's physical effects, but its psychological impact on both the operators who used it and the defenders who faced it. The flamethrower violated fundamental assumptions about warfare between professional soldiers. It offered no possibility of honorable combat. It transformed fortifications from protective positions into death traps. Most importantly, it gave defenders time to understand exactly how they were about to die. The speed at which Marine flamethrower operators could clear multiple positions in short time periods reflected this psychological dynamic. Once Japanese defenders in a particular sector understood that flamethrower teams were operating nearby, their behavior changed in predictable ways. Instead of remaining concealed and waiting for American infantry to approach within effective range, they began emerging from fortifications prematurely to engage at longer distances. This tactical shift, born of desperation to avoid the flamethrower, played directly into American tactical advantages. Corporal Joseph Rybakiewicz operated a flamethrower on Iwo Jima for 30 days, one of the longest continuous periods of flamethrower service recorded during the campaign. He cleared 7 pillboxes and rescued at least 2 wounded Marines under fire. The weight of his equipment approached 90 pounds, including not just the flamethrower, but additional demolition charges and personal weapons. Yet, Rybakiewicz, like other successful operators, learned to move with mechanical efficiency that minimized exposure time while maximizing psychological impact. The technique that successful operators developed wasn't officially documented in Marine Corps training manuals until after the war. It involved approaching Japanese positions from angles that forced defenders to make quick decisions under maximum psychological pressure. An operator would move to within 40 yards of a fortification, the maximum effective range of the M22, but would not immediately fire. Instead, he would position himself where defenders could see him clearly through their firing slits or observation ports. The psychological impact of seeing a flamethrower operator preparing to fire, of knowing what was about to happen, often caused defenders to evacuate their positions before the weapon was even used. When defenders did remain in place, the actual attack sequence took less than 10 seconds. The operator would fire a short burst, 1 or 2 seconds, just enough to demonstrate that his weapon was functional and aimed correctly. This initial burst served as a final warning, a last opportunity for defenders to choose evacuation over incineration. If no one emerged within seconds, the operator would fire the remaining 6 or 7 seconds of fuel, saturating the interior of the fortification with burning napalm that would continue burning for several minutes after the initial attack. The efficiency of this technique allowed some operators to clear multiple positions in rapid succession. The key wasn't physical speed, but psychological timing. Once word spread through Japanese defensive positions that flamethrower teams were operating in their sector, defenders in adjacent fortifications began altering their behavior even before they were directly attacked. Some evacuated their positions entirely. Others attempted to engage American forces at longer ranges. Some maintained their positions, but exhibited signs of extreme stress that affected their combat effectiveness. Over 30% of all Japanese casualties on Iwo Jima resulted from flamethrower attacks rather than bullets or explosives. How a West Virginia farm boy became a fearsome warrior with a flamethrower at Iwo Jima +2. This statistic, documented in post-battle analysis, reveals the extent to which flame weapons dominated the tactical landscape. But the number doesn't capture the full psychological impact. For every Japanese soldier killed by flamethrowers, dozens more altered their behavior because of the threat. Fortified positions that might have held out for days against conventional weapons were abandoned after hours when flamethrowers appeared. Defensive complexes that required coordinated infantry assaults with heavy casualties could be neutralized by a single operator in minutes. The flame tanks that supported infantry operations from February 21st onward amplified this psychological effect exponentially. The Sherman M4A3R3 flame tanks, which Marines called Mark Is or Zippos, carried 300 gallons of fuel and could project flame 150 yards, linked in. Unlike portable operators who had 8 seconds of flame, the tanks could fire continuously for extended engagements. Their 3-inch frontal armor made them immune to Japanese machine gun fire and resistant to most anti-tank weapons the defenders possessed. As the battle progressed and portable flamethrower casualties reached 92% in some battalions, Marine commanders became so dependent on flame tanks that infantry units would halt their advances and wait for flame tank support rather than attempt to clear fortified positions with conventional weapons. National Wabiwuchu Museum LinkedIn. This dependency represented a fundamental shift in American tactical doctrine. For the first time in the Pacific War, psychological weapons took precedence over firepower superiority. The Japanese response to flame tanks revealed the extent of their psychological impact. American troops following flame tanks into battle reported that Japanese defenders displayed more fear of these vehicles than of standard armor, with soldiers preferring to advance behind flame tanks specifically because of the terror they inflicted on enemy forces. National War Museum LinkedIn. When a flame tank approached a defensive position, defenders faced an impossible tactical calculation. They couldn't destroy the tank with the weapons available to them. They couldn't hide from its flame projector, which could saturate an area the size of a baseball diamond in seconds. Their only options were to evacuate before the tank arrived, or die in their fortifications. The systematic application of flame weapons across Iwo Jima transformed what American commanders had expected to be a multi-month campaign into a 5-week battle. Intelligence estimates before the invasion predicted that securing the island would require 3 to 4 months of sustained combat. The rapid deployment of flamethrowers, both portable and tank-mounted, collapsed that timeline by breaking Japanese defensive morale faster than conventional weapons could destroy their fortifications. But the psychological cost of this efficiency extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. The Marines who operated flamethrowers carried burdens that conventional infantry never faced. Corporal Rybakiewicz kept a photograph of a Japanese soldier's wife and 2 children throughout his life, taken from an enemy he had killed. The photograph haunted him. He asked his wife to return it to the Japanese consulate after his death, attempting some form of posthumous reconciliation for what he had been required to do. Herschel Williams, after receiving the Medal of Honor for his 4-hour action on February 23rd, experienced recurring nightmares for 17 years. The nightmares didn't involve being shot at or wounded. They involved the sounds and smells of burning human beings, the screams from inside fortifications as napalm consumed oxygen and flesh, the knowledge that he had inflicted deaths so horrible that even enemy soldiers deserved better. Williams didn't speak publicly about these experiences until 1962, when a religious conversion provided him with a framework for processing the psychological weight of what he had done. The efficiency with which Marine flamethrower operators cleared Japanese positions on Iwo Jima wasn't a triumph of military innovation. It was evidence of warfare's capacity to exploit the most fundamental human fears. Every soldier can be trained to face death. No amount of training can eliminate the instinctive terror of burning alive. The Marines who weaponized that terror accomplished their mission. They saved American lives by breaking enemy resistance faster than conventional tactics could have achieved. But they paid for that success with psychological burdens that lasted decades. Don Graves, the only flamethrower operator in his battalion to survive Iwo Jima, experienced his religious conversion on the beach during the battle itself, lying in the black volcanic sand with nowhere to go, watching Marines die around him. He put his face in the sand and spoke to a God he admitted he didn't know much about. His prayer was simple and desperate. If you can do for me what people tell me you can, I will serve you the rest of my life. He survived. 18 Marines from his battalion of 335 also survived. The mathematics of that survival rate haunted Graves as much as the memories of the positions he had burned out. The documented efficiency of flamethrower operations on Iwo Jima influenced American military planning for the rest of the war. When strategists began developing plans for Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands, flame weapons received unprecedented priority. Production facilities went to maximum capacity. Plans called for thousands of additional portable flamethrowers and hundreds more flame tanks. The logic was straightforward. If flame weapons could break Japanese resistance on an 8-square-mile island, they could break resistance on the home islands. The psychological calculus behind this planning revealed how thoroughly American commanders had internalized the lessons of Iwo Jima. They weren't planning to defeat Japanese defenders through superior firepower or tactical skill. They were planning to break Japanese will to resist by threatening them with deaths so horrible that surrender became preferable. The flamethrower had transformed from a tactical weapon into an instrument of psychological warfare aimed at an entire nation. Operation Downfall never occurred. Japan surrendered in August of 1945 after atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The massive stockpile of flame weapons prepared for the invasion was never used. Most were eventually scrapped. The United States continued using flamethrowers in Korea and Vietnam, but never again on the scale planned for Japan. The weapons moment had passed, but its psychological impact on everyone who encountered it, whether as operator or target, lasted lifetimes. The claim that one Marine cleared 12 caves in 90 minutes remains unverifiable through historical documentation. The most thoroughly documented case, Woody Williams's action on February 23rd, involved 7 pillboxes cleared over 4 hours. But the broader truth behind the exaggerated claim is more significant than the specific numbers. Multiple Marine flamethrower operators on Iwo Jima did accomplish what seemed tactically impossible. They cleared numerous fortified positions in time periods that conventional weapons would have required hours or days to achieve. The speed of these operations wasn't the result of superior courage or training. It was the result of weaponizing a fear so fundamental that military discipline couldn't overcome it. The Japanese defenders who faced flamethrowers on Iwo Jima weren't cowards. They were professional soldiers who had proven willing to die for their emperor. They held positions through 3 days of naval bombardment that would have broken less determined forces. They maintained discipline through weeks of sustained artillery fire and aerial bombing. They accepted casualties that would have caused most armies to surrender. But when faced with the choice between burning alive in darkness or abandoning their fortifications, their training and cultural conditioning failed them. Not because they lacked courage, but because courage has limits that instinct does not respect. The Marines who operated flamethrowers understood this dynamic intellectually, but struggled with it psychologically for the rest of their lives. They had accomplished their mission. They had saved American lives. They had broken enemy resistance through a combination of technological capability and psychological insight. But they had also participated in warfare that violated fundamental assumptions about honorable combat between professional soldiers. The flamethrower reduced warfare to its most primal element, the fear of fire, and in doing so revealed truths about human nature that most people would prefer to ignore. The efficiency of flamethrower operations on Iwo Jima demonstrated that psychological warfare works. Fear matters. The willingness of soldiers to hold positions or abandon them often comes down to what they believe they can survive. Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima believed they could survive bullets, artillery, and conventional combat. They couldn't believe they could survive burning alive. That belief, or lack of it, determined the outcome of countless individual engagements across the island. The flamethrower exploited that psychological vulnerability with mechanical efficiency that saved American lives, while creating psychological burdens that operators carried for decades. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.